Making decisions in life is already a challenge, and then along comes an awakening process, and all of the old programming that helped us do that just goes straight out the window. So today I'm addressing a question from one of my viewers around how to make decisions. And of course, I don't have the answers for you, but I can tell you a little bit about my experience and some of the things I've learned, and maybe that will help to inform your way of decision making after awakening. So, I guess, firstly, to talk a little bit about decision making before an awakening process or before a major shift in consciousness, we have some really clear pathways that are generally subconscious or unconscious about how to make decisions in life and our direction. You know, our conditioning, the way in which we've been raised, our culture gives us a really sort of straightforward pathway to take. And then as we start to shift our consciousness, that pathway becomes much more open. We have a lot more freedom in what we can choose in life because we have the awareness and the understanding about that conditioning to start to break those patterns, those habits, and those ways of being. But as options open up before us, it can be quite confusing about which direction to take. And then to add to this, there's the drop in motivation that a lot of folks experience during awakening. And certainly for me, this was a huge thing that, you know, the individual human will starts to fall away. And in place of that is seemingly nothing. And so for many, many years, I didn't really have any motivation to speak of. You know, there was not really any desire to achieve or to make things happen. As it used to be in my life, I could do so much in a day and kind of make quite a lot of complex decisions and move forward with complex tasks. And there was a drive behind that, but that drive was very much sourced from all of this conditioning, all of this sort of idealized way of who I should be and how I should be in the world. And so as that kind of falls away and the veil is lifted from our eyes and we sort of see where our previous motivations have come from, we realize that they're insubstantial, that the motivation was extrinsic. It was coming from our culture, from our family, from our friends, expectations of society, and expectations that we had of ourselves to show up and to sort of succeed in life. And I found that my motivation dropped so far back, I really didn't know if I could be functional. Like a lot of the decisions that I was making and the ways that I was showing up in the world was arising from this sort of need just to keep going, to kind of somehow continue to function when there wasn't anything of substance that was actually driving that. So I was just sort of going through the motions, not really believing in the decisions I was making and not really feeling any motivation for what I was doing, which was a really exhausting process for a long time. And so what I've found is that there's been a shift in my experience of that over time. And it really took quite a long time to settle into where I am now. And where I am now, I still feel like, you know, it's difficult to find motivation at times. But usually this is when I'm kind of seeking, I'm hoping somehow from an egoic place that I'll have this like intense energy in one direction because I really want that direction to be the thing, right? But in reality, what is actually happening is there is no drive until the aliveness of consciousness kind of starts to move me, that I am the instrument that is being having music made through it, right? And if I allow consciousness to move me, really easily, if I'm not in resistance to it, if I'm not trying to force it to go in a particular direction, then things actually feel pretty good. As soon as I find that there's resistance there, or that I'm hoping that it will move me in a particular direction, because that's what my individual egoic self wants, then all of a sudden I'm encountering a huge amount of fatigue and a real struggle to kind of move forward in life. So this is still a vacillating process for me, but my awareness of it really helps. You know, I'm able to kind of pick up on the signs that I might be trying to force things down a particular route. And so when we start to approach decision making from an awakened place, there's a few different models that I really enjoy, that I find helpful. And the first is this sense of head, heart, and gut. Or in the place of gut, I like to say body, because we do have these kind of concepts in Western culture around the heart and the mind and the body as separate things. But, you know, the gut is really where we feel a lot of the aliveness, a lot of the intuition and the intention of our body. So head, heart, and gut. And for a lot of folks, you know, pre-awakening, we're very much operating from this headspace where we might be looking at decisions from the perspective of pros and cons, or what's going to be beneficial for my success, or, you know, what is the logical thing for me to do in this situation. And then the heart has this compassionate, open, emotive, connective, empathetic aspect to decision making. And, you know, this can be a very strong place for certain people pre-awakening as well. If we might be too much in connection with our empathy or our emotion, we can be really driven by that in decision making and kind of obscure completely the logical aspect of decision making. And then the gut, this sort of instinctive, deep survival intuition, you know, if we think of it in relation to energy centers or chakras, the gut feelings are down in that lower chakra region, where it's all about survival and kind of making decisions from fight, flight, freeze. And that's not to say that wisdom doesn't arise from that space. It certainly does, but that the kind of dark side of that gut instinct decision making is that we are really operating from the sympathetic nervous system, and our kind of survival instincts. So we may not be taking the heart or the mind into consideration. And so some really beautiful advice that I had been given during my awakening process, and during times where it was really difficult for me to make decisions, was to listen not to a single one of these centers, head, heart, and gut, but to listen to all three and to wait for them to come into alignment. And I think that this is the really challenging part of decision making, when we've been conditioned to kind of weigh up pros and cons, or to make snap decisions on an emotional level, or on an instinctive survival level, that waiting is the really difficult part. And even after we have a big shift in consciousness, there might still be this sort of impetus or this momentum behind resolving things really quickly. And so our urge to kind of resolve any tension or any paradox, or kind of not knowing in our life, can cause us to sort of fixate on one of these centers and just go with the answer that that center has, rather than waiting for them all to come into alignment. So this capacity to kind of suspend ourselves in the ocean of not knowing, is really what I feel to be the central aspect of decision making during awakening. That we are actually not trying to know the answer before we know the answer. and to have trust that the answer is going to arise at an appropriate time, at a ripe time for that answer to come. And sometimes it can feel really edgy in the way that it does arise. You know, for example, perhaps you feel like there's a deadline looming, and that if you don't make the decision before this deadline, then it's really going to be quite disastrous. And so you might get to moments before the deadline, and it's actually the tension and the increasing pressure of that deadline that is needed in order for these centers to kind of come into alignment and to really work out where they're at. And so sitting with the discomfort of not knowing for prolonged periods of time is the essence of making decisions that are in alignment with our awakening and in alignment with our consciousness. Which may sound like saying not making decisions. And in a way, it kind of is, because ultimately the decision that gets made is not coming from us, the individual self. It's coming from a natural kind of unraveling of what is into its new form. So it's, you know, the movement of the Tao, the way, the natural order of things is going to coalesce into what's next, rather than us ourselves making the decision. The problem with this is that we can get a little bit too into the delusion of flow, or you know, when you meet folks who are really deeply in their new age spirituality, and it's like, I'm just flowing, man, like everything is easy and I've just got to go with what is you know, what is naturally arising. And that is true, but what is naturally arising isn't always the easiest path necessarily. That there might actually be challenge involved. There might be very hard, firm boundaries that are called to be set. So you aren't necessarily, it's not the path of least resistance, so to speak. You know, when I say that we're suspending ourselves in the ocean of not knowing and we're allowing the next thing to arise, it doesn't mean that we're just being pushed around by forces that aren't the ground of being itself. So starting to discern between, say, other individual egos or individual wills versus what genuinely is naturally being called for is quite important. And again, when this discernment is being called into being, it's really these three centers of head, heart, and gut that we're listening to as well. And we're not listening to one as a hierarchical kind of ruler over the others. We're inviting them to kind of come together. But ultimately, the deepest place that we might want to feel that unification of the three would be in the heart center, because it's in the middle. So we're listening to that ground-based survival work from the bottom up, from our gut level upward. And we're listening from that cognitive kind of transcendental space above downward. And those two are meeting in our heart center. And our heart center also has its own information and its own form, but it can contain those two really well. And so another model which can be helpful for sort of discerning, you know, our path in life or a way forward is, I draw from kind of the traditional yogic idea of how to know what is true. And I mentioned this in a very recent video of kind of triangulating our own experience, or in this case, our own desired outcome for the decision, with the knowledge or the input of someone who is really experienced, very wise, and has a familiarity with the terrain that we're trying to work out or navigate. and also the wisdom or the advice of records that have been passed down over generations and generations, which might be in the form of scriptures or holy texts or something that really has that ground of consciousness at its heart. And so using these three sort of sources, we can kind of triangulate into a center point, you know, where the three of them might align on our decision. So an example of this might be, you know, I'm not knowing whether or not work is possible for me to continue in the location I currently am. This is a real situation, right? Because I don't really speak the language here, and I'm trying to work out how it is that I make a living and how it is that I survive in the place that I am. And so there is kind of the ideas that are arising within myself around what decision or what pathway I might take with that. And then I'm also reading quite a lot of books at the moment, quite a few on sort of non-dual Shaiva Tantra. I, you know, touch back into the Tao Te Ching very regularly, and even just like more modern wisdom, which arises from the psychological realm and academia, and you know, folks who are dealing with like eco-spirituality. So I'm sort of drawing from these written texts that have a tradition of some form that dates back. And I'm drawing from my own sense of inner wisdom. And then I'm also talking to the people in my life. So I'm having conversations with my family who, you know, they've made big decisions in their life and they've come up against similar challenges of how to make a living and how to make decisions that are going to be really conducive to a harmonious, happy life. And so by triangulating these three things, I'm working out, you know, where do they come into alignment with each other? Where do they differ? And is there enough overlap that there is a sense of an arising truth from those 3 points of the triangle? So that's kind of another model that could be used. But the heart of both of these models is the ability to sit in the tension of not knowing and to remain in that tension of not knowing for as long as it takes for the knowing to naturally arise. And I think that we really do understand when we're forcing a knowing, because a forced knowing still has inner conflict. There's still this sense of like different parts of us in conflict with the other parts. If I leave here, then I'm going to lose, you know, this beautiful garden that I have access to. And so there's a conflict or there's a tension there. And that's when I know that the decision is arising not from the nature itself of being, but it's arising from some part of my own experience, my egoic individual self that's like, I'm fixated on this pathway, but there's a whole bunch of my ego beings that are not aligned with that pathway. Whether when a decision arises from the ground of being, there's this sense of firmness and real trust that that is the thing, and that that is the only option, even if other options might seem available, that this is the one that I have to take, that I've been called to take. And while there might still be a sense of like grief or sadness that, oh, if I go, then I lose the garden, but the conviction in that pathway means that it's experienced as grief and not as conflict. So it's a mourning of what might be lost rather than a, oh, but I wish I could still have it. I hope that kind of makes sense. Yeah, take it or leave it. But if I was to just emphasize, you know, the one thing that really feels central to all of this is suspending in the not knowing for as long as you possibly can. Do not lock down any possibilities unnecessarily early. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, let me know if you are making decisions at the moment, if you're struggling to make decisions after awakening, if your motivation might have dropped away after a long time of kind of feeling really driven by previous ego structures. I'd love to hear about your experience. Thanks so much, folks, and see you next time.